Lexi Monroe was not your ordinary woman. She stood out in a world where people often underestimated her because of her gender. With sun-kissed skin, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and an air of quiet confidence, Lexi had earned her place among some of the toughest individuals in the military. But it wasn't just her strength or resilience that made her remarkable, it was her bond with dogs. Specifically, military working dogs. These weren't pets. They were highly trained partners capable of saving lives, detecting danger, and taking down threats. For years, Lexi had dedicated herself to training these incredible animals. Her days were filled with early mornings, long hours, and endless patience as she worked alongside them. Each dog under her care became more than just a trainee. They became family. Among all the dogs she trained, two held a special place in her heart. Rex, a sleek Belgian Malinois with a golden coat and piercing gaze, and Dagger, a sturdy German shepherd whose loyalty knew no bounds. Together, the trio had faced countless challenges, from tracking suspects in dense forests to securing dangerous zones during missions. They were a team, and their connection was unshakable. Despite her accomplishments, Lexi often found herself battling stereotypes. Some people couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of a woman leading such powerful animals. Comments like, "You sure you can handle that?" or "Aren't these dogs too much for someone like you?" followed her everywhere. It didn't matter how many times she proved herself. There was always someone ready to doubt her abilities. Still, Lexi refused to let negativity weigh her down. Instead, she channeled it into motivation, pushing herself harder and proving time and again that she belonged exactly where she was. One sunny afternoon, after weeks of grueling assignments at the base, Lexi decided it was time for a break. She loaded Rex and Dagger into her truck and headed toward a small roadside diner nestled along a quiet stretch of highway. The drive was peaceful, with the windows rolled down and the warm breeze brushing against her face. The dogs sat quietly in the back, their heads occasionally poking out to catch the wind. For once, there were no commands to follow, no drills to perfect, just a rare moment of calm. The diner itself was charming, with its retro sign flickering slightly in the sunlight and tables scattered across the parking lot. Families enjoyed meals outside while travelers refueled their cars before continuing their journeys. It seemed like the perfect spot to unwind. But as Lexi pulled into the lot and stepped out of her truck, she immediately noticed something off. A group of bikers loitering near the entrance caught her attention. Their leather jackets gleamed in the sun, and their loud laughter echoed through the otherwise serene setting. Something about their energy felt tense, almost confrontational. Lexi took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. She grabbed Rex and Dagger's leashes and walked toward the diner, hoping to avoid any trouble. But trouble, it seemed, had other plans. As Lexi walked toward the diner with Rex and Dagger by her side, she could feel the weight of the bikers' stares. Their eyes followed her every move, sizing her up, or perhaps sizing down, the moment they noticed her. At first, their murmurs were low, almost indistinct, but it didn't take long for one of them to speak loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, what do we have here?" came a deep, mocking voice that carried across the parking lot. Lexi glanced over her shoulder without slowing her pace. The speaker was a tall, broad-shouldered man with tattoos snaking up his arms and a sneer etched onto his face. His name, she would soon learn, was Viper, a nickname he clearly lived up to. He stood slightly ahead of the others, his stance oozing arrogance as if he owned the entire space. Behind him, his gang chuckled, egging him on like hyenas circling prey. "Look at this," Viper continued, gesturing toward Lexi with exaggerated flair. "A little lady playing soldier. What's next? Are you gonna tell us your puppies are trained killers too?" His words dripped with mockery, each syllable designed to cut deeper than the last. The rest of the group erupted into laughter, slapping their thighs or nudging each other as though they'd just heard the funniest joke of the year. Lexi clenched her jaw, but kept walking. She had dealt with people like Viper before, loud, obnoxious individuals who relied on intimidation to mask their own insecurities. She wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of reacting. Rex and Dagger, however, seemed less inclined to ignore the commotion. Both dogs stiffened slightly, their ears perking up as they sensed the tension in the air. They weren't growling yet, but their bodies radiated alertness, ready to spring into action at Lexi's command. Viper, noticing the change in the dog's demeanor, only grew bolder. "Oh, come on now," he called out, taking a step closer. "Don't be shy. Let's see what your mutts can do." His tone shifted from teasing to outright condescending, his lips curling into a smirk. Or are they just big softies pretending to be tough? One of the bikers chimed in, tossing out insults of his own. "Yeah, maybe she's just using him to look cool. Bet she doesn't even know how to train a real dog." The comments kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last. Another biker shouted, "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you let me show you how it's done?" He grabbed a stick lying nearby and hurled it toward the edge of the parking lot, yelling, "Go fetch, puppy." The crowd roared with laughter again, clearly enjoying the spectacle they were creating. But Lexi remained unfazed, her focus unwavering. She knew better than to rise to their bait. Instead, she tightened her grip on the leashes ever so slightly, signaling to Rex and Dagger to stay calm. The dogs obeyed instantly, though their muscles twitched beneath their fur, coiled like springs waiting to release. For a brief moment, Lexi considered leaving. After all, she hadn't come here looking for trouble. But something stopped her, a quiet determination bubbling inside her chest. These men thought they could belittle her, reduce her years of hard work and dedication to nothing more than a punchline. And while she didn't need to prove anything to them, part of her wanted to shut them up. Not for herself, but for every person who had ever been dismissed because of someone else's ignorance. Still, she said nothing, letting the silence stretch between them. It was a calculated move, one she knew would unsettle them more than any retort could. Sure enough, the laughter began to fade, replaced by uneasy glances exchanged among the bikers. Even Viper hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of Lexi's composure. But the standoff was far from over. If anything, it was only beginning. The silence that followed Lexi's refusal to engage only seemed to fuel the biker's frustration. Viper, who had clearly expected her to either lash out or shrink away, now looked uncertain. His smirk faded slightly as he tried to regain control of the situation. "What's wrong, princess?" he taunted, stepping even closer. "Cat got your tongue. Or are you scared your little show dogs can't back you up?" Lexi didn't respond. Instead, she stood tall, her posture relaxed yet commanding. She knew better than to let their words affect her. Years of training had taught her that emotions could cloud judgment. And right now, staying calm was key. Beside her, Rex and Dagger remained perfectly still, their eyes locked onto the bikers like lasers. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. One of the bikers, emboldened by Viper's lead, decided to push things further. He swaggered forward, his boots scuffing against the asphalt, and reached out toward Dagger without asking. "Hey, big guy," he said mockingly, his tone dripping with false sweetness. "You wanna be friends?" Before his hand could touch Dagger's fur, the German shepherd let out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that sent chills down everyone's spines. The biker froze mid-reach, his bravado evaporating instantly. Even Viper took an involuntary step back, his earlier confidence wavering. The crowd of onlookers, which had gathered around the scene, fell silent. Some watched nervously, while others exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what might happen next. One thing was certain: these weren't ordinary dogs. Their sheer presence commanded respect, and anyone foolish enough to underestimate them was quickly learning that lesson. Viper, unwilling to admit defeat just yet, attempted to salvage his pride. "Oh, come on," he scoffed, though there was a hint of unease in his voice now. "It's just a growl. Any dog can do that." He turned to his gang for support, but they avoided meeting his gaze, their earlier bravado replaced by wary uncertainty. Seeing their hesitation, Lexi finally spoke. Her voice was steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "These aren't just any dogs," she said simply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "They're trained professionals. And trust me, you don't want to find out what they're capable of." Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. For a moment, no one moved. Then, almost imperceptibly, the bikers began to shift uncomfortably, their postures less aggressive, their expressions more guarded. But Viper, stubborn as ever, refused to back down entirely. "Prove it," he challenged, crossing his arms over his chest. "Show us what they've got. Or are you all talk?" Lexi hesitated, weighing her options. On one hand, she didn't owe these men anything. They were strangers who had chosen to pick a fight for no reason. On the other hand, this was an opportunity to demonstrate not only her skill, but also the incredible bond she shared with her dogs. More importantly, it was a chance to teach them a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. After a brief pause, Lexi nodded. "Fine," she said evenly. "But remember, you asked for it." With that, she gave Rex and Dagger a quick command to sit, ensuring they stayed composed while she prepared for what came next. The dogs obeyed immediately, their disciplined behavior speaking volumes about their training. Viper sneered, trying to mask his growing unease. "All right, let's see it then," he said, gesturing dismissively. "Blow us away." Lexi ignored his sarcasm and scanned the area quickly, assessing her surroundings. There were plenty of objects scattered around the parking lot. Cones marking parking spaces, benches near the diner entrance, even a few empty crates stacked against a wall. It wasn't ideal, but it would work. Turning back to the bikers, she addressed them directly. "This won't take long," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And when it's over, maybe you'll think twice before mocking someone again." With that, Lexi signaled Rex and Dagger to stand at attention. Both dogs rose smoothly, their movements synchronized and precise. The bikers exchanged uneasy looks, their earlier bravado crumbling as they realized they had underestimated both Lexi and her extraordinary companions. Whatever happened next, it was clear that this wasn't going to end the way they had planned. Lexi moved with purpose, her every step radiating confidence as she prepared to showcase the true capabilities of Rex and Dagger. The makeshift obstacle course she had mentally mapped out in the parking lot wasn't elaborate, but it didn't need to be. Her dogs were trained for far more complex tasks, and this impromptu demonstration would be more than enough to silence the doubters. "Watch closely," Lexi said calmly, her voice carrying just enough authority to command attention. She turned to Rex first, giving him a simple hand signal. "Rex, stay." The Belgian Malinois dropped into position instantly, his body rigid and focused, his eyes locked onto Lexi like lasers. Even from a distance, his intensity was palpable, and the bikers couldn't help but glance at each other nervously. Viper crossed his arms tightly over his chest, trying to appear unfazed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression. Next, Lexi signaled Dagger. "Dagger, heel." The German Shepherd stepped forward smoothly, matching her pace perfectly as she began walking toward the first obstacle, a row of orange traffic cones scattered haphazardly across the lot. Without hesitation, Dagger weaved through them with precision, his movements fluid and effortless. Each turn was sharp, each stride deliberate, leaving no doubt about his training or discipline. The onlookers murmured quietly among themselves, some nodding in approval while others looked genuinely impressed. One woman clapped softly, only to stop when she noticed the bikers glaring at her. But Lexi didn't care about their reactions. She was focused solely on her dogs, trusting them to do what they did best. Once Dagger completed the cone weave, Lexi called Rex into action. With a single whistle, she directed him to leap over a low wooden bench placed near the diner entrance. Rex soared through the air with grace and power, clearing the obstacle easily before landing silently on the other side. The crowd gasped audibly, and even Viper raised an eyebrow, though he quickly masked his surprise with a scowl. But Lexi wasn't done yet. To truly drive home the point, she decided to demonstrate one of the most critical aspects of military dog training: control under pressure. She retrieved a protective sleeve from her truck, a padded arm guard used during bite work exercises, and slipped it onto her own arm. Then, standing several feet away, she gave Rex a firm command: bite. In an instant, Rex sprang forward, closing the distance between them in seconds. His jaws clamped down firmly on the sleeve, not hard enough to cause harm, but with enough force to make it clear he meant business. The sound of his teeth gripping the material echoed through the parking lot, drawing involuntary flinches from the bikers. Despite the display of power, Rex remained completely obedient, releasing the sleeve immediately when Lexi gave the command to let go. Viper shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado fading further with each passing moment. All right, he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for those nearby to hear. I get it. They're trained. Big deal. Lexi ignored him and continued the demonstration. Next, she set up a mock scenario where Dagger would have to protect her from a perceived threat. She asked a volunteer from the crowd, an older man who had been watching the scene unfold, to approach her slowly, pretending to be aggressive. When the man raised his hand slightly, mimicking an attack, Dagger reacted instantly. He positioned himself between Lexi and the threat, barking sharply to warn the man to back off. The bark was deep and commanding, sending a clear message that any further advances would not be tolerated. The volunteer froze, raising his hands in surrender, and Dagger immediately relaxed once Lexi signaled that the threat was neutralized. The entire exchange lasted mere seconds, but its impact was undeniable. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier mockery replaced by something closer to awe, and perhaps a hint of fear. As the demonstration came to an end, Lexi turned back to Viper and his gang, her expression calm but resolute. These dogs aren't just tools, she said evenly, addressing the group. They're partners, and they're capable of protecting me, or taking someone down, in seconds. So next time you feel like mocking someone, remember this moment, because respect isn't given, it's earned. Her words hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the unwavering presence of Rex and Dagger beside her. For the first time since the encounter began, the bikers were silent, not out of defiance, but out of sheer disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The demonstration had left the bikers visibly shaken, but Viper wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. He stood there, his arms still crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched as if he were trying to hold onto whatever scraps of confidence remained. His gang, however, was less composed. Some shuffled their feet awkwardly, while others avoided eye contact altogether, clearly regretting their earlier bravado. All right, Viper finally said, breaking the silence with a forced chuckle that sounded more like a growl. So your dogs can jump through hoops and bark loud. Big deal. His voice carried a hint of defensiveness now, though he tried to mask it with sarcasm. Let's see what they're really made of. Lexi raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unshaken. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to save face by pushing things further. But she also knew this was a dangerous line to walk. If she agreed to escalate the situation, there was no telling how far Viper might go to prove himself right or wrong. Still, part of her wanted to finish this once and for all, to make sure these men understood the gravity of underestimating someone, and something as skilled as her and her dogs. Fine, Lexi replied evenly, her tone firm but measured. But let's be clear, this stays controlled. No funny business. Agreed? She looked directly at Viper, her piercing gaze daring him to argue. For a moment, he hesitated, his pride warring with his instinct for self-preservation. Finally, he gave a curt nod, though his lips pressed into a thin line. With that settled, Lexi turned her attention to Rex and Dagger, issuing a series of commands to prepare them for what came next. She signaled Rex to take position near her side, while Dagger stood slightly ahead, his body coiled like a spring, ready to act at a moment's notice. The crowd of onlookers grew tense, sensing that this final showdown would be different from the playful agility course or even the protective bite demonstration. This time, it felt personal. Viper stepped forward, attempting to regain some semblance of control. "All right, tough girl," he sneered, gesturing toward his gang. "You think your mutts are so scary. Let's see how they handle us." He motioned for two of his buddies to advance cautiously, creating a loose semicircle around Lexi and her dogs. It was a calculated move, an attempt to intimidate without outright aggression, but Lexi saw right through it. Instead of reacting defensively, she gave a single command: "Rex, watch." The Belgian Malinois immediately locked eyes with Viper, his posture rigid and alert. Every muscle in his body screamed readiness, and his unwavering stare sent a chill down Viper's spine. For the first time since the confrontation began, the biker leader actually looked uneasy, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, as if unsure whether to stand his ground or step back. Encouraged by Rex's display, one of the other bikers decided to test the waters. He took a hesitant step closer to Dagger, muttering something under his breath about seeing what the big fuss is. Before Lexi could intervene, Dagger let out a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the parking lot. The sound was deep, primal, and impossible to ignore. The biker froze instantly, his face paled as he realized the dog was not bluffing. "You want to push this?" Lexi asked coolly, addressing Viper directly now. "Because trust me, you don't. These dogs aren't here to play games. They're trained to neutralize threats, and believe me, they won't hesitate if they feel I'm in danger." Her words hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the visible tension radiating from both Rex and Dagger. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, their earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of the reality unfolding before them. Even Viper seemed to shrink slightly, his bluster fading as he realized he'd bitten off more than he could chew. To drive her point home, Lexi issued another command: "Dagger, advance." The German shepherd moved forward slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked onto Viper as if sizing him up. Each step was deliberate, calculated, and filled with purpose. The biker leader swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as he took an involuntary step backward. "That's enough," Viper snapped suddenly, raising his hands in surrender. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear he was desperately trying to hide. "We get it, okay? Your dogs are impressive." Lexi didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gave Rex and Dagger the signal to return to her side. Both dogs obeyed instantly, their disciplined movements a stark contrast to the chaos the bikers had brought upon themselves. As they settled back into place beside her, Lexi turned to face Viper one last time. "Impressive isn't the word I'd use," she said quietly, her tone carrying a quiet authority that silenced any lingering doubts. "They're professionals, and they deserve respect, not mockery." The air was thick with tension as Viper and his gang stood frozen, their earlier arrogance completely stripped away. Lexi's calm but commanding presence, coupled with the undeniable power of Rex and Dagger, had left them with no room to maneuver. It was one thing to mock someone from a distance, hiding behind bravado and loud words, but it was another entirely to face the reality of what they were up against. The bikers now understood that Lexi wasn't bluffing, and her dogs weren't just for show. Viper, still trying to salvage some shred of dignity, raised his hand slightly higher in a gesture of surrender. All right," he muttered, his voice laced with frustration and embarrassment. "We get it. Your dogs are trained. Happy now?" Lexi didn't respond immediately. Instead, she kept her focus on Rex and Dagger, giving them a gentle pat on their heads as a silent acknowledgement of their flawless performance. Both dogs relaxed visibly at her touch, their bodies shifting from alert mode to a calmer state. Though the immediate threat had passed, their eyes remained watchful, ensuring that the situation stayed under control. They were trained professionals, after all, and they wouldn't let their guard down until Lexi gave them the signal. Finally, Lexi turned her attention back to Viper and his crew. Her expression softened ever so slightly, though her tone remained firm. "This isn't about being happy," she said evenly, addressing the group. "It's about respect. Respect for skill, for hard work, and for the bond between humans and animals. You came here mocking me because I'm a woman. You mocked my dogs because you assumed they were ordinary pets. But instead of walking away when you had the chance, you chose to escalate things." Her words struck a nerve. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their faces flushed with shame, or perhaps fear. Even Viper, who had spent the entire encounter posturing and puffing out his chest, looked smaller now, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of his own actions. Lexi continued, her voice steady, but tinged with authority. "If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's this. Never judge someone based on appearances. You underestimated me, and you underestimated my dogs. That mistake could have cost you far more than your pride." As she spoke, the crowd of onlookers began to applaud softly, their cheers growing louder with each passing second. Families eating at the diner tables clapped enthusiastically, while truck drivers honked their horns in approval. One elderly man tipped his hat toward Lexi, giving her a respectful nod. The bikers shifted uncomfortably under the collective gaze of the audience, realizing just how foolish they must have looked. For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation might end quietly, with the bikers retreating to lick their wounds. But Viper, stubborn to the last, couldn't resist getting in one final word. Yeah, he grumbled, waving a dismissive hand. "We got the message, okay? No need to rub it in." Lexi simply smiled faintly, not bothering to argue further. She knew better than to push too hard. Sometimes, silence carried more weight than words. Turning her back on the bikers, she focused once again on Rex and Dagger, praising them warmly for their discipline and teamwork. "Good job, boys," she said softly, scratching behind their ears. "You handled yourselves perfectly." The bikers lingered awkwardly for a few moments longer before mounting their motorcycles, revving their engines loudly in a feeble attempt to reclaim some semblance of dominance. But the sound felt hollow now, drowned out by the lingering applause of the crowd and the quiet confidence radiating from Lexi and her dogs. As they sped off, kicking up dust in their wake, it was clear they wanted nothing more than to put as much distance between themselves and the scene as possible. When the roar of the bikes faded into the distance, the parking lot erupted into celebration. Strangers approached Lexi, congratulating her on handling the situation with such poise and professionalism. A young boy shyly asked if he could pet Rex, his eyes wide with admiration. Lexi obliged, letting him gently stroke the dog's fur while explaining how years of training and trust had forged the incredible bond between handler and animal. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden rays across the parking lot, Lexi felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because she had proven herself to the bikers, but because she had demonstrated the value of patience, skill, and mutual respect. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was a reminder to everyone present that true strength lies not in aggression, but in the ability to rise above ignorance and prejudice. And as she loaded Rex and Dagger back into her truck, ready to head home, she knew this day would stay etched in her memory, and in theirs, for a long time to come. The encounter at the diner quickly became the talk of the town, or at least the talk of everyone who had witnessed it. By the time Lexi returned to the military base later that evening, news of what had happened had already spread like wildfire. Word traveled fast in tight-knit communities, especially when something as dramatic as a showdown with a gang of bikers was involved. It seemed like everyone knew about the fearless female K9 handler and her extraordinary dogs. When Lexi arrived back on base, she was greeted by a mix of curious glances and approving nods from her fellow soldiers. Some approached her directly, eager to hear the full story. "Is it true you took on a bunch of bikers with just your dogs?" One soldier asked, his tone equal parts disbelief and admiration. Another chimed in, I heard they were picking a fight. And you shut them down without breaking a sweat. Lexi chuckled softly, brushing off the attention with characteristic humility. It wasn't anything special, she said casually, though there was a hint of pride in her voice. Just another day with Rex and Dagger. She glanced affectionately at her two companions, who sat obediently beside her, tails wagging lazily. They seemed completely unfazed by all the fuss, as if saving the day was simply part of their job description. Her commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, soon called her into his office for a debriefing. Though he maintained a professional demeanor, it was clear he was impressed. Monroe, he began, leaning back in his chair with a faint smile playing on his lips, I got reports flooding in about some extracurricular activities today. Care to explain? Lexi recounted the events calmly, leaving out no details but emphasizing that she hadn't sought out trouble. It had come to her. When she described how Rex and Dagger had handled themselves during the confrontation, Colonel Hayes nodded thoughtfully. You've done an excellent job training these animals, he said finally, his tone carrying genuine respect. Not only are they skilled, but they're disciplined under pressure. That's not easy to achieve. He paused, studying her for a moment before continuing. What you did out there, showing restraint while still asserting authority, that's leadership, Monroe. And it's exactly why we value handlers like you so much. You didn't escalate unnecessarily, and you turned what could have been a dangerous situation into a teachable moment. For them, and for us. Lexi felt a swell of pride at his words, though she kept her expression neutral. Recognition wasn't something she actively sought, but hearing her efforts acknowledged meant a great deal. The colonel went on to commend both her and her dogs officially, adding their names to a list of exemplary performers within the unit. It was a small gesture, but one that reinforced her place among the best in her field. Outside the office, her fellow soldiers greeted her with newfound respect. Those who had once doubted her abilities, or worse, dismissed her outright, now looked at her differently. There was no resentment or jealousy in their eyes, only admiration. A few even joked about wanting to borrow Rex and Dagger for their own protection, eliciting laughter from the group. That night, as Lexi settled into her quarters, she reflected on the day's events. While standing up to the bikers had been satisfying, what truly mattered to her was the message it sent, not just to them, but to anyone who underestimated someone based on appearances. She thought about all the times people had questioned her capabilities because she was a woman, or assumed her dogs were mere accessories rather than highly trained partners. Today proved that stereotypes could be shattered, not through anger or aggression, but through skill, patience, and dignity. Rex and Dagger curled up at her feet, content and exhausted after their long day. Lexi smiled as she watched them drift off to sleep, their steady breathing filling the room with a sense of calm. These dogs weren't just tools of her trade. They were family. Together, they represented years of dedication, trust, and mutual respect. And together, they had shown the world what teamwork and perseverance could accomplish. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, Lexi allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She didn't need applause or accolades to know she'd made a difference today. Sometimes, the most meaningful victories weren't measured in medals or promotions, but in the quiet confidence of knowing you stood your ground and earned respect the hard way, by proving yourself, action by action. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to demonstrate her strength. But for now, Lexi let herself rest, grateful for the bond she shared with Rex and Dagger, and for the reminder that true strength always finds its way to the surface, no matter how many obstacles stand in its path. The next morning, Lexi woke up with the same determination that had driven her for years. The events of the previous day were now part of the past, a memory she could reflect on, but not dwell over. As much as the confrontation with the bikers had been a turning point, it was also just another chapter in her journey. For Lexi, every day brought new challenges, and today would be no different. After a quick breakfast, She met Rex and Dagger at the training field, ready to dive into their routine. The dogs seemed to sense her energy, bounding toward her with enthusiasm as soon as they saw her approach. Their tails wagged furiously, and their eyes sparkled with excitement. To them, there was nothing better than working alongside Lexi, whether it was practicing agility drills or honing their detection skills. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the field, Lexi put the dogs through their paces. She started with basic obedience exercises, reinforcing commands like sit, stay, and heel. Though these tasks might have seemed simple to an outsider, they were the foundation of everything Rex and Dagger did. Precision and discipline were key, and Lexi never took those fundamentals for granted. Next came the more advanced training: tracking scents, navigating obstacle courses, and simulating real-world scenarios where the dogs would need to protect or neutralize threats. Each drill was designed to push them further, testing not only their physical abilities, but also their mental sharpness. By the end of the session, both dogs were panting heavily, their tongues lolling out as they sprawled on the cool grass. Lexi knelt beside them, praising their efforts with warm words and gentle scratches behind their ears. "You two are unstoppable," she said with a grin, her voice filled with pride. "But we've got bigger things ahead of us, don't we?" Indeed, orders had come in early that morning. A new mission awaited. This time, it involved assisting local law enforcement in tracking down suspects in a dense forested area. The terrain would be tough, the conditions unpredictable, but Lexi knew her team was more than capable of handling whatever came their way. With Rex and Dagger by her side, she felt prepared for anything. Later that afternoon, as she packed supplies into her truck, Lexi couldn't help but think about how far she'd come since her early days in the military. There had been moments when self-doubt crept in, when others' skepticism made her question if she truly belonged. But experiences like yesterday reminded her why she kept pushing forward. Every challenge, every insult, every victory shaped her into who she was today, a strong, skilled handler who refused to let anyone define her worth. By evening, as the trio drove toward their assignment, Lexi glanced at Rex and Dagger resting quietly in the back seat. Their loyalty and partnership meant everything to her. They weren't just tools of her trade. They were living proof that trust, hard work, and perseverance could overcome even the toughest odds. Together, they formed a bond that went beyond words, a connection built on mutual respect and unwavering dedication. As the road stretched ahead, lined with towering trees and fading sunlight, Lexi allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Life as a K9 handler wasn't easy. It demanded sacrifice, patience, and resilience, but it was also incredibly rewarding. Every successful mission, every life saved, every person inspired reminded her that her work mattered. And while prejudice and ignorance might never fully disappear, moments like the one at the diner proved that action spoke louder than words. When they finally arrived at the edge of the forest, Lexi stepped out of the truck, taking a deep breath of the crisp evening air. The mission ahead wouldn't be simple, but she faced it with confidence. With Rex and Dagger by her side, she knew they could handle whatever lay in store. "All right, team," she said softly, clipping their leashes onto their harnesses. "Let's show them what we're made of." And with that, the three set off into the woods, disappearing into the shadows as the last rays of sunlight faded behind them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain: Lexi Monroe and her dogs would face them head-on, proving once again that true strength lies not in dominance, but in unity, skill, and an unbreakable bond.